I am NetMoverSitan. Welcome to my Library of Ruina Lore Breakdown series. I'll be briefly going over what was covered in the Lobotomy Corporation Lore Breakdown series. But to hear the full details of that, please check out that series, or in case you need a full reminder of what happened in that. Where to begin with this? Oh yes, the world that this is set in. A world that's well and truly part of this world includes a city. A city that's divided into the following parts. There's the nests, which are the nice parts of the city. Somewhere in a grim-dark Korea. The back streets are the nastier parts of the city. The outskirts are the parts outside the city where people are left to die. Those that even the back streets reject. The back streets are ruled by organized crime, where mercenaries and fixers are used for freelance work, both within the back streets and even outside them to those willing to pay them. The nests are where the wings of the world rule over, only exerting their influence when they need to. Each of these wings are ruled over by the head, which deal with those that either overreach themselves or they just decide to destroy them simply out of paranoia by sending their arbiter. Well, if they want to be subtle about it. If they don't want to be subtle about it, they send the claws in. To be honest, they send the claws in just to make sure, in case the arbiter alone wasn't enough. Both were sent to one of these wings. Well, one of these companies by that point. Lobotomy Corporation. Lobotomy Corporation was a company founded by three people, Ayin, Benjamin, and Carmen. They produced power using abnormalities, some natural, some created, along with the pain and suffering that they caused those that worked on them. This was part of her plan to create a medicine for the disease of the soul, the cure of which eluded her. But she didn't let that put her off. There were others that would be tied to her fate. The overreaching fool, the guilt-stricken OCD sufferer, the well-meaning spy, the loyal test subject, the sacrificial lambs, the seasoned warrior, the sophisticated elite, the sadist, and the wise old friend. They would all become Sephirahs, human brains in robot bodies that would become part of the cure for the disease of the soul, a pursuit that would result in a fate worse than death for Carmen, but was necessary for the production of cogito in enough quantity to make the cure possible. Sometime after what happened to Carmen, Ian made an android with Benjamin's help, which he named Angela, whom he was disgusted with and kept his distance from. Much to Benjamin's confusion, as if he didn't like her, then why did he put her together in the first place? Although once Ian had the separars, she was there to assist him in creating the cure, and thanks to Time Track and a number of other technologies, they had all the time in the world. It took many trials, a lot of research, and a countless amount of failed attempts. But that infinite amount of monkeys did more than just write the complete works of Shakespeare. The Seed of Light was completed. As far as those involved were concerned, it took 50 days to complete the Seed of Light. But in reality, it was much longer. Remember Time Track? That complicates how long it truly took from the inside. It took 10,000 years to complete, with all the rewinds and resets, whatever you want to call it. But from the outside, it only took 10 years. In all that time, many died to complete that project, to provide that success, including Ian, who was in the form of X, the manager of that facility. Yes, even the architect of that nightmare wasn't exempt, as he died as well. Over and over again. Yeah, I know. Quite a piece of work, wasn't he? The Seed of Light was made to cure the disease of the soul, as Carmen would put it. Those with this, well, some have an above average amount of greed or greater. Some are nihilistic. Some are excessively violent. Some are overwhelmed by despair. Some are just outright psychotic, or some combination of two or more of these traits. But all affected by this had a strong drive towards selfish and self-destructive behaviors. A rare few, like Carmen, had a natural immunity to it. It was the reason why she was sincere with her altruism, and why she wanted to do something about this apathy sickness, is another way of putting it. Although once the Seed of Light was active and had been going for 3 days, that was when Angela decided to choose her own path and took the rest of its power for her own purposes, using it to make a library. Wanting to learn more about the city that she was still unable to visit herself. This action would prove to have more far-reaching consequences. Consequences that even she wouldn't be able to anticipate. At least, not fully. The library is where guests are invited into it. An invite being the only way into the library in most cases. And they have to fight the librarians on a given floor to the death. Death for the librarians being a temporary setback now. Angela made sure of that. If the guests win, they're granted the book or books that they came to the library for. If the librarians win, then they're or more specifically, turned into books. Yes, that's right. You thought that the Evil Dead had a book made from human remains. This is a place that's full of them. Well, it's not just the inside of the library that's covered here. It's also what's outside as well. The wings of the world. 26 of the most powerful and influential companies that rule each of the districts like a feudal fiefdom, with the nest being the nicer metropolitan areas, which are the only parts that matter to them. The back streets being where everyone else lives. Those in the back streets can pay to move into a nest, however, but it's expensive and is dependent on other factors, such as previous actions that might make them or those above them look bad. And even then, they can be kicked out of the nest if they don't yield anything useful in terms of goods or services. There are good reasons why they keep their involvement within the back streets to a minimum, besides not really caring. I'll get into that eventually. Although, since the Lobotomy Corporation's fall and transformation into the library, there are 25 of them now. As for the wings themselves, they can be quite specialized, providing for what others lack. At times, in a more symbiotic relationship. For example, L Corp made use of K Corp's medical nanotech, along with R Corp's cloning capability, and not just for its primary function. T Corp's TT2 protocol to manipulate the flow of time, and W Corp's teleportation capability. L Corp lacks these technologies, while they provided in exchange for some form of reimbursement. While in some cases there might be indirect competition with each other. And so can lead to some conflict between them. Regardless of how they are to each other, they can be quite varied with how they run their districts. For example, the nest of District 10 is run by J Corp, where it's basically a Korean Las Vegas, while District 23, which is run by W Corp, the backstreets have tastes that are too exotic for me to speak of right now. Yeah, that'll be some time during the urban myth section of the Law Breakdown series. As for the head, well, they're otherwise known as A-Corps, the top of the pile, the de facto rulers of the city. And boy, do they run it. In a place where capitalism is almost a religion, they're the most ruthless and the most morally bankrupt of the lot. They're not entirely motivated by money, although quite close. But they do rule through fear, violence, and even insanity. To the point where it seems like they make decisions with the advice of astrologers and mystics. Why do I say that, you may ask? Well, that's because they have laws on guns that have nothing to do with ethics. There's a timer on cloning, and even making it so that only they and those that they allow can have effective firearms. All to make sure that they stay on top of the pile. They're also quite paranoid, and so they send their spies, known as eyes, to keep track of the wings and smaller companies, those that they even suspect of rebelling or just overreaching themselves. Yeah, that's right. They don't feel safe unless the one that clears up the mess of a failed experiment can't their pants without them knowing about it. If one of these companies does something that the head considers deserving of action, they'll at least send an arbiter. Yeah. That's to take care of the problem in a more subtle way. Or at most, they'll send the less subtle clause. Just to make sure. Only L-Corp has survived that onslaught. But not by much. Normally, if the head comes for you, consider yourself deader than mouldy dog. They also have a population control method that would make Reverend Thomas Malthus vomit in disgust. I'll go into that once we get to the relevant part of this. Well, this is the introduction video. I'd be going a bit ahead of myself if I went over that at this point. Let's move on to the fixers. Hired guns. That's basically what they are. Not always literally, as the ethics law prevents guns from being all that effective, and even those available are quite expensive. Fixers are about as common in that world as retail workers are in ours. They can be quite varied in what they specialise in, whether that be keeping the peace, attacking a specific target or targets. They can even be glorified lawyers. I mean, can you imagine what Phoenix Wright and Miles Edgeworth would be in that world? Let us just say that when Phoenix Wright defends his client in that setting, It won't just be a psychological hit to the prosecution when he shouts, "Take that!" It will likely involve a piercing weapon pointing at them. What was I talking about? Oh yes, fixers. They have different grades, which is dependent on what they've accomplished and also how strong they are. The strongest of these fixers can rise from Class 1 to a colour fixer, which either gains some kind of power or possibly awaken a power that's already there. They're also given a title as part of that promotion. Kali was known as the Red Mist before her recruitment into Elcor. But colour fixers, and indeed any others, can be demoted if they perform actions that are either unauthorized or, at worst, taking things too far, e.g., killing where they aren't assigned to. They also need to make and sign a contract with the clients before they're assigned a particular task. If they don't do that, it's not only something that their office might have a problem with, they also won't get paid for the job. That contract is proof of the task that is about to be carried out. Next we have the Syndicates. They're the organised crime that rule over the back streets of each district. They can vary from the more conventional kind of organised crime, where they demand protection money in exchange for not killing you in a messy way, along with other criminal acts such as black marketeering, contract killings, manufacturing and distributing illegal substances. These syndicates can also be the least conventional, making people do the seemingly ridiculous in exchange for not killing them, and actually being quite restrained, using only violence when there's a specific reason to do so. Yeah. They can be that strange. Even by this... Even by that city's standards. The fingers, or the hand as they're otherwise known as, are the 5 most powerful of these syndicates. The top of that particular pile. They keep the backstreets from collapsing into total war and anarchy. They're powerful enough to keep the wings and even the head from trying to crack down on them. Not that they'd care, as long as they don't cause trouble in the nicer parts of the city, as it's more effort than they're willing to expend. Besides, they're sometimes hired for jobs that are unofficial and potentially illegal, so they can deny that they were hired in the first place. There are syndicates below them, subsidiaries that deal with business that's considered too menial for the fingers. There are also some independent syndicates, but these will also be covered in later videos. In fact, a couple of them will be covered in the next law video. There are also other independent groups. Some are just those with no affiliation to the wings, fixers, or syndicates. They could just be part of a business, a cult, or They could just be a deformed monster. Something that was either out of control or made to be out of control. There are also the distortions to be considered. What are distortions, you may ask? Well, they're beings brought about after the white nights and dark days. Powerful beings that are somewhere in between a colour fixer and an abnormality when it comes to how unstable and dangerous they can be. Some are abominations that seek pure destruction, due to them having the highest amount of emotional collapse outside of a student accommodation during lockdown. And I'm saying that to give you the idea of what is involved, while others can control their destructive urges. Some are tied to the actions of one that will be covered when we get to that point. As for how this story starts, let's go over that first. This started when Roland walked into the library. He doesn't notice where he was. All he mentioned was that it involved someone called the Purple Tear, and that he was in a place with smoke in it. Then Angela found him, and having dealt with more unnecessary speech and verbose conversations than she would care to remember, she was sick of those. And also those that didn't get to the point. She also didn't like those that questioned her. She asked him how he got into the library. Roland wanted to ask her something, but she interrupted him by tearing off his right leg off. She then asked again where he came from, how did he enter, and for what purpose. Brutal. He then went on to give a lengthy explanation of his routine and how he's barely making ends meet as a one-man fixer office. Angela's response to that was to tear off his right arm due to him not getting to the point. Ooh. Who said to take the expression, "That'll cost you an arm and a leg"? Literally. Angela has become much more brutal since she went rogue. Anyway, let's continue with the interrogation. She threatened to tear off his remaining arm and leg next. She deduced that he had no purpose, and he didn't know how he got there. She then asked for his identity. He then promptly told her that he was a washed-up grade 9 fixer, then asked some questions. Yeah, not a wise choice there, as she tore his remaining arm and leg off in response to this. He then told her his name when asked, and after that he fainted, largely due to blood loss. Angela, that escalated quickly, didn't it? I mean, there's some within Syndicates that will consider your interrogation methods to be excessive and lacking in any subtlety. And if they'd call you out on that, that should tell you that, well, all you need to know about what you're doing wrong. You've clearly learned a lot from your maker. He then woke up with his limbs attached and in better condition than before. Initially, Angela wanted to find out why he was there uninvited, and decided that she overreacted during the interrogation. You think? And decided to reattach his limbs, repaying what she owed him, plus a bit extra. She then decided to put him to work within the library. He initially thought that he was abducted by a syndicate or by a wing for experiments regarding singularity research. Although that's partially true, due to the library originally being part of a wing, this wasn't the case. When she said that he would help her, she wanted him around because he posed a potential threat if she let him go or left him to rot. Not that he could leave without her permission anyway. She also needed him to collect books from all around the city to find the absolute book. He also had knowledge about the city that was useful to her. Apparently she wasn't fooled when she said, Roland said that he was a washed-up grade 9 fixer. Either that or she didn't really have anyone else that was up to the task. Hard to know which is worse. After a conversation involving a human popcorn machine, one that Angela threatened to turn Roland into if he spoke of such nonsense again, due to going through many cycles of theory. Considering what is known about things in that city so far, that's not the worst fate for those living there. But it's not one that Roland would want, even though he didn't really have that much to lose by that point. She then provided him with how the invitation process worked within the library. And the first invitation was sent. He questioned the methods, but they were considered fair compared to how things were outside the library. Why aren't I convinced about that? He found out her name during this, and Roland's time as the patron librarian of the floor of General Works begins here. Oh, and for the record, that image of the city as it is during Library of Ruina, that's not mine, as that's by someone called Dervert. Right. Next we have the Canard class section of the lore breakdown. Until next time. Hail the rabbit!